Hello my clever crafty friends, it's Janet coming to you today with 5 cards from the new January 2020 Hero Arts My Monthly Hero Kit. Today's cards showcase the large flower dies, a flower wrap, and of course the always wonderful stamp set. I'll show you several techniques today, including how to maximize your time by coloring the die cuts with Oxide inks without needing to make masks or cutting the flowers up. You're going to want to see it. A simple and inexpensive blending tool makes it all possible. I'm also maximizing my stash today by choosing to use embossing folders to create the backgrounds of these cards. The texture is beautiful and perfectly complements these pretty die cuts. There's a few other surprises in store, so I hope you'll make sure to watch the whole video so you won't miss a thing. Let's get crafting! Here are the amazing dies in the January kit. There are 7 flowers, 2 greenery dies, and 2 butterflies. There's also the large envelope die on the left and the floral wrap on the right. Last but not least is a sentiment strip that is perfectly sized for the stamp set. They're a wonderful addition to anyone's die collection. Here are the sample cuts of all the flower dies. They are very textured with pretty indentations to help the cuts be more than simple shapes. Here you can see how many details are embossed in the butterfly. It really is pretty. This month you also receive 8 half sheets of cardstock. There are 2 craft sheets and 6 sheets of glimmer cardstock in the pink family. There are 2 dark pink sheets, as you see here, 2 medium pink sheets, and 2 blush colored sheets. The blush cardstock has a slightly more glittery finish, but they are all beautiful and dry embossed very well. We get more glimmer ink this month. We got to play with red, green, and gold glimmer ink a few months ago, and this month a generously sized dropper bottle of aqua is provided. I did a test strip of it, and you can see it has gorgeous deep aqua color with beautiful shine. I'm happy to report that pink ribbon is in the kit this month. A pot of pink glitter embossing powder is also included, and these coordinate nicely with the cardstocks and floral dies. Here is the 4x6 stamp set. There are 12 sentiments that can cover many occasions, including Valentine's Day, which is coming up soon. It has this awesome newsprint background stamp, and there are letter mailing images that coordinate well with the envelope die. I cut a sample with the envelope die to show you. My pressure was too high and it cut the fold lines, but you get the idea. I didn't use this die for my cards this time, but it is a handy addition to my stash. Here is a sample flower wrap. I used leftover mulberry paper from the Mexican Fiesta kit from a year or so ago. I thought it would be perfect as a flower wrap. I've been waiting for a good use of it, and I think it looks great for this. Here's a closer look at it cut and folded. I pulled a bunch of embossing folders that I thought had good potential for these cards. I feel like I forget about them, which is a shame as they add so much beauty and texture to backgrounds. How about you? Do you forget to use these too? Let me know. I'm going to start with a Valentine theme card, and I've embossed an A2 size panel with a Doris Conversation Hearts folder. Look at that texture. I need to trim this down to 4 by 5 1/4 size so that it will fit on an A2 card base, leaving a small border around it. I'm using my We Are Memory Keepers all-in-one tool. I find it handy to have many tools in one board. I've already used the trimmer, and now I'm going to use the stamp press to make my sentiment. I've got an in-depth review of this tool if you're interested. A link will be in the video description. To use this stamp press, I first place the cardstock and use the included magnets on board to secure it. And I'm using the sentiment Happy Valentine's Day from the set, and I've put it on the press. But before I begin, I do need to remember to apply some anti-static powder on the cardstock first. I do tend to forget this, but I'm trying to do better. The anti-static powder keeps the embossing powder from sticking where it shouldn't, and it helps to make a nice, clean, embossed image. And with that, I'm ready to stamp. The first thing to do is to apply Versamark ink to the stamp and use a stamp press platform to press it to the cardstock. I usually do this step at least twice to make sure a good coating of ink has been applied. Then I sprinkle a generous amount of pink glitter embossing powder to the stamped impression and gently tap off the excess. I like to use my very inexpensive coffee filter to collect all the excess powder. The paper is virtually static free, so powders and glitters will easily pour out of it into your container when done. And here's another tip. Use a lint roller to collect excess powder or glitter that got away from you. It helps a lot to keep your workspace neat and tidy. Now it's time to use a heat gun to melt the powder. The pink glitter powder has a pretty finish and it's dark enough on white paper, which is great. I was a little concerned that it might not show up, but that is not a problem at all, and I'm very happy with how it worked on the sentiments. I'm going to cut out this sentiment now. My sandwich for this is the Cuttlebug thick white plate, and then the bee plate on top of that. Next goes my magnetic plate, and on top of this I put a thin metal shim. The metal shim still allows the magnetic power to be strong enough to keep my die in place when I put it over the cardstock. The metal plate also assures a good clean cut. On top of this goes another bee plate, and then it's ready to run through my Cuttlebug. Now I'm not going to show this step every time I make a card, but I did want to show you how it generally works, and you can see what a nice cut I end up with. I discovered a great way to color the die cuts. I picked up a set of 20 eyeshadow applicators at my local Dollar Tree for $1. They work wonderfully with Oxide ink to color my die cuts with precision. There's no need for masking or to cut the flowers to use different colors. I'm so tickled with this discovery. I hope you'll pick up a pack for yourself and see what I mean. If you give it a try, please let me know in the comments here how you liked it, because I think I've discovered something that I'm going to pull out regularly to use in my crafting stash. Here you can see I'm coloring the biggest leaf stem die cut. I used 2 Oxide inks and forest moss and peel paint. With my shadow applicator, I'm able to control these 2 colors to create a dark stem and lighter leaves. I'm also able to put a streak of dark color on each leaf to represent the leaf veins using the side of the applicator. I think you can see how quick and easy it is to use these little applicators on small die cuts like this. Here's the smaller leaf stem die, and I use the same technique with this one, except to add more interest when both stems are used. I'm choosing to substitute the forest green with cracked pistachio. I didn't try it, but the eyeshadow applicators should work equally well with any ink you want to use for coloring. Again, if you try something else, do leave a comment and let us know. But I really feel like I've hit on something that will make my die cut coloring a lot quicker and easier for future with these simple and inexpensive eyeshadow applicators. Next, I will show you how I colored the flowers, starting with this one. I'm using worn lipstick and candied apple oxide inks for this, and I start by applying the worn lipstick to the center petals. Then I add the candied apple ink to the outside edges. While doing this, I lightly blend the color over the edges of the worn lipstick ink. Again, any ink or colors will work similarly. When I get to the area where the stem is, I'm just paying attention to how far I'm bringing the applicator down. In this case, I wanted to show you that I did get a little of the ink in the stem area. It's a tiny amount. The forest moss ink used to cover the stem hid this well, but even if it hadn't, I think the very slight bit of color in the stem area is so worth the hassle and time that you would use to cut the stem and the flowers apart and/or masking them. To be honest, this is the only flower I did where any of the flower color ended up on the stem, but I did want to show you that if it does, it probably won't matter. To finish this flower, I use fossilized amber to color in the center. Again, I find that the applicator makes it really easy to control the exact place you want it to be. Now in this case, I decided to shape the center even more by going back with the worn lipstick. I also blended the edges a little bit more as well. This is a large die cut flower that has no stem. I started this one by coloring it all with worn lipstick, and then I used the side and tip of the applicator to apply shadowing with the candied apple ink. I just followed the embossed petal lines already in the die cut. It's totally up to you how much you want to add by following these lines. That's the beauty of this, is you decide how much work you want to put in it. To add more interest, I applied a touch of candied apple ink to the flower edges. And there you have it, a pretty flower complete with shading in a matter of moments. For this next flower, I applied squeezed lemonade ink all over the blossoms for my first coat. I initially tried using fossilized amber that you see here as a shadow color, but the contrast wasn't enough. So you'll see that I brought in spiced marmalade, and that worked really well as a contrasting color that I needed. This particular die cut doesn't have embossed details. It's really one of the only that doesn't. So color is key to making it pop and have dimension. and you can see that it really does look pretty right here. Once the flowers were done, I moved on to finishing the stem coloring. For this, I used the peeled paint again. You can see in this example how easy it was to precisely control where the green ink was placed. I know I'm repeating myself again, but I am so happy to have discovered the eyeshadow applicators work so well for the details. For the next flower, I followed the same routine, but this time I used shaded lilac as the main color and wilted violet as the shadow color. I carefully whisked the shaded lilac on the petals, avoiding the green leafy area around the stem. Then I used the wilted violet to shade the edges of the die cut, and I followed the embossed petal lines to make the petals dimensional by simply using the applicator to apply shadow along the embossed patterns. I let the artist lines inform me how to make the flower look its best. If in doubt, you can never go wrong by simply following their guidance. To complete the flower, I used cracked pistachio this time for the main stem and leaves first. Then I used peel paint to fill in all the leaves, including those next to the flower part. To make it pop just a little bit more, I used forest moss on the leaves closest to the flower. With this coloring all done, I can now assemble my first card. Going back to my embossed panel, I applied the flower wrap made of that pretty mulberry paper using double-sided adhesive to hold it in place. The wrap is not attached yet, but the flowers will hold it since they are glued over the top edges. I've sped up the placement and gluing of my flowers and greenery. There's no big secret to arranging them, just do it the way that is pleasing to you. I actually ended up adding one more flower to this arrangement at the very end, so if you don't like something, you can always adjust by filling in empty areas with more flowers or stems. To attach the panel to the card base, I used double-sided foam tape from the Dollar Tree. This tape is thicker than 3M tape, so I use it for raising a panel above the base. Next, I use wet glue to attach the sentiment strip that says Happy Valentine's Day. And this card is coming along pretty nicely. Here is where I decided to add that last extra flower. It just seemed a little too empty up there in the top. So for this, I used a little 3M double-sided foam tape. It gives just the right amount of lift without it looking higher or closer than the flowers in the foreground or the front of the bouquet. I just think that looks a little bit better and more balanced, don't you? Here it is, all finished, and I think it turned out quite nicely. I'm going to start card number 2 by working on butterflies. Here's the largest butterfly, and I've already colored the outer wings with Blueprint Sketch and the interior with tumbled glass using my sponge tip eyeshadow applicator. Next, I'm going to paint in the middle part with the Aqua Glimmer metallic ink. Before I do, I want to make sure the edges and back of the wings are fully coated with the Blueprint Sketch ink, because when the wings are tilted off the page as if flying, I don't want any white to show. Now I'm just touching a paintbrush to the dropper of the Aqua Glimmer metallic ink to pick up a small amount to dab in the middle of the wing. I found the ink sinks quickly into my cardstock, so move quickly to feather it out to the outer and inner edges. I think the glimmer ink in the middle picks up the light really well, and the finished wing is pretty stunning. I use the same technique on the half butterfly die cut. Again, using the Blueprint Sketch Oxide ink on the wing edge and tumbled glass on the interior wing. You can see that I made sure to apply the ink heavily to make sure coverage was good. Then I applied the glimmer ink to the white area left on the wing. I can report that the ink seemed to have no effect on the Oxide ink. As many of you know, Oxide ink does react to water and other paints, so it's just good to know that there's no fading or bleeding caused by the glimmer ink interacting with the oxides. And because of this, it was easy to blend out the glimmer ink into the Oxide inks for a nice effect. The final step for these butterflies was to fill in the bodies, and for this I just used a black Copic marker, and of course any marker would do the same thing. I decided to take one additional step with these butterflies, and this is certainly something you would not have to do because it does add some work and time to the process. But Oxide ink is pretty wet and takes a good while to dry, So I decided to apply yet another small bit of coating there on the edges and used it to apply some of the pink glimmer embossing powder. I used my paintbrush to push back some of the excess so that it was just on the wings. And then I took my heat gun to it. And you can see it darkens the edges of the wings, and of course it adds a bit of shine and glitter. You can see all the butterflies finished here and what that does for a final touch. I decided to use the Butterfly Derice embossing folder with this designer paper, and because the paper is thin, I did get a little bit more white showing on the edges, and also I had a little piece that got taken out right there. But no worries on this missing little piece because I've got a sentiment strip that's going to cover that. If it was going to happen in any place on my card, I'm glad it happened there. So to start, I'm going to make this bush, and I just used 3 pieces of the cardstock die cuts. And it's a little sparse. You could add more to make this a more defined little bush, but I thought the 3 pieces worked just fine, so I went with it and stayed with it. But I apply these just flat right on top of the butterfly embossed paper, which, by the way, I put on a black card base. The sentiment strip is black, so the black card base and the sentiment strip together kind of work to bring it all to a cohesive image. Now I'm going to apply a thin strip of 3M double-sided foam tape to my sentiment strip. This is going to just lift it slightly above the little bush that I created, and you can see how it will look here. Just a matter of getting it fairly straight. I'm working to cover that area that was pulled out by the embossing folder and cover the bottom stems. Next, I'm going to place the butterflies. I've got 3 of them, as you saw earlier, and it's just a matter of placing them again where it's pleasing to you on your card. I did take the time to fold the wings up and only glue the body parts down. My hope is that when this is taken out by the recipient, the wings will again start to pop up and show their dimension. It just adds that extra bit of realism to the card and a little extra touch. Your card will also look a little bit more professional with just a few extra little things. Now to finish off the card, I'm going to use some sequins, including a couple stars. And with that, this beautiful Get Well butterfly card is complete. With card 3, I've cheated a little to show how nice the wrap works with purchased flowers. I'll be using the Scrolls embossing folder this time. The blush colored glimmer cardstock took the embossing beautifully. And here is the Derice folder, so you know what that looks like as well. I simply arranged the flowers that I purchased at Michael's onto the cone and glued them on. And then I've used double-sided foam tape from the Dollar Tree to attach the cone and its flowers to my pretty scroll background. Next, I'll place the card panel onto a black A2 sized card blank, and this is almost done. There's just a few finishing pieces to put on. First, I made a 3-loop bow out of the pink ribbon, and I attached this with glue dots. And then last, I'm going to just slip in this 4U sentiment strip. It's attached with wet glue, and I'm just applying pressure so that it will stick in with the flowers. This is a clean and simple card that still has a lot of detail and beauty. Let's take a look at the finished card. Card number 4 requires 1 flower, and that's this pretty rosebud. First, I covered the bud with worn lipstick, Oxide, and like before, I used candied apple at the tip of the bud and to shadow the rolled edge of the flower. Then I used Forest Moss ink to carefully color the leaves at the base of the bud and also colored the stem. I used the darkest color in order for it to stand out well against the pale pink embossed background. This is the cross embossing folder I'm using for this Sympathy card. I cut the panel with the largest stitched rectangle die from this Lawn Fawn set. And the final panel is quite pretty and is perfectly sized for an A2 card base. Now there is no edge around the panel and the card base this time. So I'm going to use wet glue to attach it to my white card base. I use my fingers to push the card against the edges and the bottom of the card, and this way it will be placed perfectly with no overhangs. Now I'm going to apply the flower that I made earlier using some double-sided foam tape on the bottom where the flower is and just wet glue where the stem is. I'm going to place this so the bud is centered right in the middle of the cross and press to adhere. This is a stunning and simple look, and you could stop here if you wanted. I chose though to add a sympathy sentiment, which is on a white strip with the message in black embossing powder. I added a few black gemstones on the sentiment. And I'll also do this around the cross, so you can see the finished card here. I present you card number 4. Okay, for my final card today, I'll be using this Doris Cloud embossing folder. Before I emboss my cardstock, I'm going to apply tumbled glass oxide ink to the interior. I'm applying it to the side of the folder that has the clouds indented so that the blue will only be on the background and my clouds will remain mostly white. Once I've coated this really well, I will carefully put in my white cardstock on the side of the folder that didn't have the inking and then close it up. I'll run it through the Cuttlebug and you'll see the result of my first impression. Now I want this to be a bit darker, so I'm going to go through the whole procedure one more time. This time when I place the cardstock back in the folder, I carefully line up the raised clouds in the folder with my embossed clouds to assure that I don't get a ghost embossed effect. And once I'm sure that's in the right place, I will close it up and run it again through my folder. And here is my finished A2 sized panel after I cut it out using that same Lawn Fawn stitched rectangle die that I used on card 4. And like card 4, I'll apply it to my white card base with white glue, lining up the edges of the card to the panel and using the table to make sure it's also even at the bottom. And this way I'll make sure I have no overhanging edges and that coverage is complete. I've cut out a piece of multicolored designer paper from Hobby Lobby with a flower wrap die, but this time I'm going to flip it over and use it, as you might have guessed, as a kite. I love when I can find ways to use my dies for different looks. It gives us more bang for our buck. This kite is going to look great on the embossed sky. Of course, kites need a string, so I'm creating one with some red and white baker's twine. I've attached the end that won't show with washi tape, and then I'm going to attach the kite to the panel using wet glue. You might have noticed that I closed up the back of the kite using 2 pieces of stacked foam tape. This gives me the puffy look I want, which suggests it's being affected by wind. Since it is puffy, I need to hold this down until the glue sets. I want a shorter sentiment strip for this card, so I've cut it with the die but trimmed the ends off, and I created new flag ends by slicing a cut in the middle and angling the next cuts from the corner to the top of the slice. This makes a nice flag without any measuring. I'm going to attach this flag to the kite itself with just a little bit of wet glue, and I'm going to put it so that the ends stick up a little as well. It's not all the way flush down on the kite, again giving more dimension. To apply the string and give it the appearance of motion, I've drawn a bead of glue in a wavy pattern. I'll form the string in this pattern and keep moving and pressing it until it's secure. I admit I had a tiny bit of trouble with this because the glue stuck to my fingers and then my fingers were sticky and pulled the string off the paper, but eventually I did manage to conquer this task. At the very end, I decided to leave a little bit hanging off the edge of the card, maybe about 1/4 of an inch. I decided the kite string needed a little more help, so I drew and cut out 3 kite bows by hand. To create them, I just drew a flattened X shape and connected the ends. Then I cut this out, but not precisely on the lines, so that the intersection where the X is has a little thickness to it and therefore will be easier to handle and glue in place. This is a little tedious because the pieces are so small, but the end result is a nice little bow that fits well on my string. Once done, it was very easy to apply some wet glue to the backs of these bows and attach them right over the top of my twine and secure them with my fingertips. The final touch to this card was adding some sequin style stars in different colors, which kind of blend nicely with the paper I used in my kite. And here is that last finished card. I hope you got some good ideas for this kit, but don't go away just yet. Click on any of the links to see more valuable card making ideas. A thumbs up would be appreciated too, and do leave me a comment about your favorite card of the group. Thanks for visiting, have a great week, and I hope to see you back soon. Bye!